Hey guys, it's Chase of csjoseph.life doing another episode for season 23 for members' premium lectures. And today we're going to be discussing how to parent ESTPs. How to parent ESTPs, season 23, episode 3. This is also known as the no risk, no reward episode because ESTPs are all about taking risks. And the reason why for that is their infant intuition inferior function, which is about risk-taking, freedom of choice, and freedom. Just when you're parenting an ESTP child, it can be a little bit difficult because, well, guess what? They're not aware of the consequences of their actions. And anything that's consequential, or at least trying to get them to understand the idea of causality, is basically insanely difficult, if not in some cases impossible. And this is oftentimes why SP types end up in jail, because they don't realize the reality of the bad situation that they're in until after it's happened or it's already happening to them, which is a serious problem. This is why SPs should be in relationships, intimate relationships with SJs, or have SJs around them, because SJs operate more so based on decisions of fear, essentially, and routine and discipline and whatnot. But it's mostly more on fear instead of based on desire. It's like a fear-based system instead of a desire-based system of decision-making, where the SJ is trying to avoid a situation instead of wanting a situation. So it's more external because of that built-in avoidance that an SJ child would have that an ESTP completely lacks. And as a result, parenting an ESTP can become difficult as a result. So anyway, but before we could really get into ESTPs, let's do a little quick refresh on what Jungian parenting is all about. In your life, you will have to parent your children. You also have to parent other people's children. You also need to parent your peers. You also need to parent your parents based on what phase of life that they're in. Don't forget, folks, that everyone has 4 phases of life, which are attached directly to the development of your cognitive functions. So remember, the gateway functions is your hero function, your inferior function, your nemesis function, and your demon function. So just keep those in mind. Also known as the warrior function. Inferior is also like the infant function, which eventually becomes the king function. King me, etc. And then the nemesis function, also known as the villain function, becomes the ally, and then the demon function becomes the angel. And like what we discussed within season 19, which are like our legacy lectures, etc. Season 19, it really walks you through the path of enlightenment, etc. To that end, and really developing your gateway function, gaining mastery over your cognitive transitions as well as your cognitive focus, allows you to ultimately reach a state of enlightenment where you conquer things like personal responsibility, personal humility, personal wisdom, and self-mastery. These are the 4 principles or the 4 pillars of enlightenment, etc., also known as cognitive integration from a psychological standpoint and less a metaphysical standpoint, etc. But the reason why this is necessary is because without understanding, without taking proactive action in one's life, either through parenting or for personal growth and development for oneself, then they're going to find themselves in a really rough or bad situation. And those situations are known as the life crises. We have quarter life crisis, we have midlife crisis, we have 3/4 life crisis, and we have final life crisis. And each crisis is attached to the specific cognitive gateways that a person has, etc. And so, for example, in order to gain personal responsibility and learn personal responsibility, you have to master your hero function and turn it into a warrior function where you're able to gain a sense of personal responsibility for the rest of your life, and that is handled through quarter life crisis. Although if someone is able to come of age and pass their rite of passage, etc., to get to a point where they already are responsible by the time quarter life crisis would actually come, which is about 25, 26, 27, 28 for men, and slightly sooner for women. Women have it a little bit sooner, but for men it's 25 through 28. For women, it's about 23 through 26, 27-ish, in that range. 23, 24, 25, 26, I'd say, and maybe 27, but not so much. Actually, usually have it got together at that point in time. Of course, if women aren't really having children per se, by that, it really starts to bother them around 27, 28, etc., typically. So, with that being said, there's these life crises that occur within a person's life. It's basically your mind, your brain, the four sides of the mind demanding attention if you are overlooking them. Now, the sad part about Western society is that Western society, the way that it is structured today, is that, there is no such thing as a rite of passage. People's youth is extended well onto their years. For example, in California, you're not considered, you still get child support until you're 19 years old, for example, in the state of California. Also, you get to keep your health insurance until you're 26, etc. Because society itself, not only is it the cause, but it's also aware of the fact that people are underdeveloped within society, especially children, and they're not reaching that level of personal responsibility. One of the reasons why they're not able to reach personal responsibility is because the way the nuclear family is structured. It's also because of our economic system. So those two things specifically. Economically speaking, the dollar is basically worthless. It is lost 96% or 93 to 96% of its value since the greenback was put into circulation as a result of the birth of the Federal Reserve, probably the most evil organization on the planet. Who knows? It's probably actually the people that own it. I'm sure it's probably far worse. But the point is that the Federal Reserve has reduced buying power of the dollar because of printing of money, because money is not attached to gold or anything tangible anymore. It's just fiat. It's just fake. It's just fake currency. It's arbitrary. And I think ESTPs realize how dumb that is. But because of this arbitrary currency and it's so inflated, it now requires 2.5 incomes of minimum wage, basically 2.5 incomes of minimum wage for anyone to be able to have their own home and their own family, which means there would have to be, between the adults in that family, they have to work 2.5 jobs to be able to bring in enough money to be able to raise a family, etc. And it's structured this way intentionally. Reason is because the powers that be don't want people to have children, so they're trying to make it as, there isn't much incentive to have children, for one. The other thing is that the powers that be, if you do end up having children, they want to be the ones to raise your children and not you. So if you're so focused as parents working, you're outsourcing your parenting to other people, which means, and those people are regulated by the state, thus the state's best interests are represented in terms of the teaching and raising of those children instead of the best interests of the parents or the tribe or the family, etc., because everyone's so focused because they're forced to be in the rat race of life, chasing after the almighty dollar, because the dollar is worthless and it's a complete waste of time. This is why I recommend to people, if you have the ability to become self-sufficient, even to the point of maybe even living in the wilderness where you don't participate in this bullshit system, I highly recommend it, because then you'd actually have a relationship with your children. Honestly, guys, think about it. All a child really needs is reading, writing, and arithmetic. They don't need anything else. They really don't need anything else. If you just give them those skills and then focus on what makes them happy and help them, become like entrepreneurs, for example, that's a better education for a child, instead of this whole go to school, go to college, get a job, be indebted, and then you're a slave to the powers that be for the rest of your life, on top of the fact that their money is not really worth very much, and that generation is not able to be raised by the parents in question either, and they're still raised by the state, which is continuing to make society degrade. The nuclear family continues to degrade, and honestly, the nuclear family is a myth. And the nuclear family didn't exactly become something until about the 1950s per se anyway. Before then, we had multi-generational families, and multi-generational families are necessary for the raising of children. And before multi-generational families, there was tribal communities. Of course, there was also polyamorous relationships. But countries around the world that have multi-generational families statistically are more successful and have more intelligent children, more capable children, and everyone's just happier in general. If you think about that, Not very many people have to work. There are also many hands make light work, etc. Parenting of children is the responsibility of not only the parents but also the extended family, as well as the grandparents involved in this multi-generational setup. And as a result, they are a lot healthier instead of just our nuclear family where I was born into, and I just had my parents and my sister, and we lived in a trailer in the woods on an island, and that's just about it. Okay. That's not really efficient. It's more efficient to have your grandparents around under the same roof, and then everyone's needs is being taken care of, etc., and everyone is respected ultimately, and then that's just kind of how it is. And then obviously there's expectations for inheritance and those types of things, which is really also necessary to understand, especially from the point of view of the curse of the firstborn. Curse of the firstborn in terms of parenting is very important. I've mentioned this in the last lecture, but I'll reiterate it here as part of this introduction. The curse of the firstborn is specifically when you have a firstborn. Typically in history, especially in ancient times, the firstborn would inherit everything, and the siblings would get nothing, basically. Firstborns were treated with a lot higher honor. The reason why is because every single day is new parenting territory with your firstborn. It doesn't matter how old you are. You could be like in your 60s, like my parents, for example, and every day is a new day when it comes to parenting their son, etc. So that kind of a thing. It doesn't go away, folks. Once you're a parent forever, and that's just the bottom line, and you can't escape it. So it's really necessary for you to understand your responsibility there. And when it comes to the firstborn, they need to be treated with a higher honor. For some reason, our society, especially Western society, doesn't really care about firstborns anymore, and statistically, firstborns end up getting screwed the most. They're the most likely to end up being removed from wills and inheritances. They're the most likely to be kicked out of the family, out of everyone else. They're the most likely to be estranged from their family. They're most likely to be the ones in the foster care system. They're most likely to be sexually abused. Those kinds of things. Well, I mean, I can give you an example of that. My ex-girlfriend Scarlett, who was an INFJ, she was the firstborn basically, and when her father attempted to sexually abuse, like her sister, for example, she would offer herself up in exchange willingly so that her sister would not be sexually abused by her father, for example. That's just one really scary real-life example that people, it ends up happening, so please be aware of that. So, but anyway, the point is that Jungian parenting, you end up having to parent your children, you have to parent other people's children, you end up having to parent your parents, and you also have to be parenting the children of your peers, as well as your peers themselves, because guess what, folks? Everyone has a parent function, thus it is everyone's responsibility to be parenting each other, because it is written, as iron sharpens iron, so does one man to another. What this means is it's everyone's responsibility to keep everybody sharp around there, because that makes sure that everyone is on the path to responsibility, everyone is on the path to humility, everyone is on the path to wisdom, and everyone is on the path to self-mastery, while simultaneously avoiding irresponsibility, pride, ignorance, and the being really like lacking in self-mastery and giving into hatred and stupid things like that, etc. So that's what is prevented through parenting. So that's why parenting is so important. And like I said, guys, this is a huge honor for me to be presenting this lecture series, because this is something I wanted to present since the very, very beginning. But we had not laid down the foundation for the science yet to be able to get to this point. So very, very, very special for us. So remember, parenting is all about nature versus nurture. And remember, your personality type is your nature, but then your actions, your activities, things that you say, things that you do, becomes nurture that's exported from yourself and imported into somebody else's nature, etc. So everything that we do creates nurture to each other, and that nurture changes or adjusts or impacts our natures. Now, the kind of impact that happens, can cause cognitive transition. It can cause cognitive focus, depending on the level of trauma in terms of parenting, etc. All of that is necessary. And we're going to be talking about cognitive focus a lot in the next episode of Season 17. I believe there's only a few episodes of Season 17 left, so the next live lecture will contain that, etc. So that's a thing coming around the corner. And then Nature versus nurture. So the first thing we're going to be talking about is a person's nature, and nature really is a person's identity, and this is why children always have the question of who am I? And remember, folks, children get their identities from their fathers. They do not get their identities through their mothers. Kind of interesting how there's a certain people group out there that claims that they got their identity through their mothers, and that's not exactly remotely true. So anyway, naturally, we're looking at ESTPs. We have the four sides of the mind. We have, oh, hi, yeah. So we have the four sides of the mind, which are, the ESTP ego, which is also known as the gladiator, and then we have the ISTJ unconscious or shadow, also known as the archivist. And then we have the INFJ, paladin, unconscious. Hi, little kitten. And then we have the superego, which is the ENFP, also known as the bard. They have this bard superego. So those are the four sides of the mind of an ESTP. I'm not going to talk about how to type an ESTP because hopefully by now you generally understand that, and you've watched season 2 and season 15 and know what the type grid is, and maybe played with the test, etc. In terms of how to type people, here you go. Thank you for visiting. So, remember that children, especially ESTPs, actually, especially Templar types, they really present as their subconscious. The reason why is Templar types, out of all the types, are very outward focused. They're not really inward. They don't really have an internal monologue, etc., except maybe INFJs, but not so much. They're so externally focused, focusing on other people's feelings and focusing on what's happening. They really know what they want and they desire and their own choice, but they're not really very internally self-aware. Children present as their subconscious, so if you're having a hard time typing your child, just remember you have to be open to the fact that, let's say you've typed your child an ISTP, they may actually be an ENFJ, or if you've typed your child an ISFJ, they may actually be an ENTP, for example. So that's just something to be aware of, so when you're typing your children, please take it with a grain of salt and make sure you're testing against their subconscious just to make sure you verify. Really, really important. So, but let's talk about how to actually parent a child, at least in terms of Jungian parenting. And this is done through impact functions. And impact functions, hi Mew Mew, the impact functions are really important because you want to make sure that you're impacting a person enough so that you can teach them, so that you can raise them, etc., instead of placate them, which nowadays is a huge issue for parents because they're constantly placating their children instead of actually impacting them. Impacting them in terms of leaving a long-lasting impression that gets them closer to responsibility, humility, wisdom, and self-mastery, etc., so that they can avoid those 4 life crises and then actually, go through those periods of their life without actually having a crisis, because that's, very important. I had my quarter-life crisis. It created divorce. I was homeless. My son was born into homelessness. I was irresponsible. No one had any respect for me whatsoever, and quite frankly, I don't blame them. And that's a really big deal, at least to me, etc. And I don't want my son to repeat those mistakes or have that generational sin passed down to him, etc. So I'm trying to make sure that it stops with me. It doesn't pass on to my children for that reason. But placating a child, when you're placating a child, when it comes to an ESTP, you'd really you would basically be enabling them, enabling their hero function, enabling their child function, also known as the tyrant function when it's very immature. It's like a high chair tyrant, etc. When you're enabling them, it's all about, they focus on the shared experiences of other people, and they focus on giving to other people, and oftentimes this can actually lead to ESTPs being taken advantage of. So then, so placation is a serious issue, and most of the time, parents get so frustrated, they get so overwhelmed in the parenting process because, like I said, they're too busy working, or they're way too stressed out, especially since the United States of America, for example, is the most stressed out place on the planet. And, definitely I feel that way for sure. But because, the high stress, it becomes a problem over time. Hi. So shared experiences, sharing and showing. So it just becomes this unlimited show and tell from the perspective of an ESTP, an unlimited show and tell that just keeps going, and it can lead the ESTP to being a doormat, and that's a serious problem. You don't want them to be a doormat. You don't want your child to be a doormat. And they also end up having a lot of shared experiences, etc., that can be a problem. They end up finding themselves in situations where the decisions that they're making, choices that they make with their NI inferior, they end up taking too much risks because it's for the sake of the shared experience. It's like, hey, I'm going to go do this very dangerous thing just so I can have a story to share with my friends later, etc. And it puts them at risk. It also puts other people in their life at risk as well because of the choices they make. And because ESTPs are unaware of the consequences of their actions, they're unaware of how their freedom of choice actually can turn other people into becoming unsafe. But then here's the thing. That lack of consequential awareness can go even further. This is why oftentimes you see STPs especially say things like, well, I'm drinking a lot right now, and I'm taking these drugs. I can take heroin anytime I want. I can shoot up anytime I want because I'm only hurting myself. I ain't hurting other people. The thing is that's actually a lie. And they're only believing that lie because they're any demon or they're any trickster for ISTPs are just not aware of the consequences to their actions. They are only aware of immediate reactions. Extroverted sensing is all about people's reactions and the immediate reaction, not long-term consequences. Reactions and consequences are not the same thing, which means results could either be a reaction or a consequence, but how much time has passed. The more time that goes by from SE, it turns into extrovert intuition instead of extroverted sensing, and this could be a serious problem. So if you're placating a child, they end up taking too many risks for the sake of the shared experience so that they could basically show off because they want other people to value them, and then by showing off they think that through performing they're going to have those people stick around and be their friends forever, etc. And that's a serious problem. You don't want your child to do that. So instead you want to impact them. And impact is very necessary from the perspective of raising your child and then ultimately teaching your child. So let's talk about raising first. Remember, folks, raising a child is all about raising your child during childhood. You do not want to raise your child after childhood. And childhood stops at adolescence. That's when childhood stops. And at that point, you need to stop raising your child and instead focus on teaching your child. And that's everything that's important. You have to really, really focus on that. So based on that, make sure that you're aware of the difference. Now, when you're placating a child, again, this is when parents, they're so stressed out or they're bad parents and they're focusing on making the hero or the child function happy for their kid. And this literally causes their kid to be spoiled. So this would be like a high chair tyrant. This would be, the ESTP. Their thinking and everything is all based on the fact like, hey, we should be giving to more people. I want to be making decisions like this. Oh, I earned a bunch of money. I'm going to go spend it all on my friend, etc. I don't know how many times I've seen ESTPs or ISTPs, STPs in general, spend so much money on other people, and then they wonder where all their money went. And it's like, oh crap, I didn't spend any on me because I'm not able to be as responsible. And it can keep them in an area of irresponsibility, which is not exactly ideal. So something to keep to be aware of when you guys are handling that, etc. Hi, kitty. So that's what happens when you're playing. But impacting is different. Impacting when you're actually, this is how you really parent a child. This is how you really parent an ESTP. And that's what you really want to do is you want to appeal to their pessimistic functions, so their parent function and their inferior function. Remember, folks, the first function to develop is the hero function. Then it is the child function. That's why they're optimistic. Then it's the inferior function because the inferior function is attached to the SE hero, okay? Because it's in an axis. They turn on an axis, for example, just like these two in the center turn in an axis. And when that happens, the parent function is the final function to develop. But because the final function to develop, when you're raising your child, you want to focus first on the child's inferior function. In this case, the ESTP. To parent them, to raise your child, to parent ESTP, you want to focus on giving them all of the freedom of choice. You never, ever, ever take away their freedom of choice. And also, when they make choices, especially choices with awareness of consequences, where they make choices that still makes other people safe, you need to reward them and provide them positive feedback for their extroverted feeling in conjunction with recognizing that they have freedom of choice to do that, so that you reward them that way. That way they understand that their decision of what they want is being rewarded or valued by other people externally for allowing, for making sure they're making a decision that's not putting other people at risk. You have to allow ESTPs to take risks. You also have to allow you also have to take risks with ESTP children, but they're not really risks that you are taking because you're the parent, but to the child it seems like a risk, so it's a really big deal. It's a new experience. It seems pretty risky, even though you're the parent. It's like it's not risky to you or your child because you're there, but the child perceives it that way, and that's really necessary for their personal growth. It's absolutely necessary. So please keep an eye on that. Please keep an eye on that. So with that being said, the impact them as pessimistic functions. Now, when it gets closer to adolescence with a ESTP, this is much more difficult. The reason why it's not difficult is because the TI parent function, you can't just appeal to the TI parent function right off the bat when they hit adolescence. You just can't do that. So what you have to do is you have to rely on something called cognitive orbit. And cognitive orbit is when you translate the parent function directly down into the shadow, and it becomes the critic function. So rules, data, and metrics. And ESTPs, they don't like rules. They don't understand it. So what you have to do is you have to teach the ESTP to break the rules responsibly, to test the rules. I'm like, here's why this rule is here. You have to explain why the rule is there. If you don't spend time explaining to the ESTP why they should be making a good decision, because they're very outcome focused, you want to make sure that they understand the outcome they're going to get, because they're very interest-based. The ESTPs only care if they just get what they want. As long as they only get theirs, that's really what they care about. As long as I get mine, guys. ESTPs are all about that. So like STPs and NFPs, they're all about what they can get out of situations. So you have to tell them, you kind of got to make it a deal, almost like a negotiation with an ESTP, and be like, hey, this is what you're going to get out of it by following this rule. And here's all of the proof of what's happened in the past. And here's the history. If you can show them the history behind why that rule exists, they'll be like, oh, I don't want to have that experience, because they have their extroverted sensing bubble, and they don't want to, and that bubble is supposed to protect them from bad experiences, because their SI nemesis doesn't want to have bad experiences, etc. So due to that, that can be an issue. Keep that in mind, folks, when you're trying to impact children. You want to teach them, you want to develop their NI, which is you just give the ESTP choices. Don't just tell the ESTP to go to bed. Don't just lock them in their room, etc. when they're in trouble. That's not going to yield any fruit. In fact, spanking an ESTP is a complete waste of time. I do recommend spanking an ESTJ, but I do not recommend spanking an ESTP because their introverted sensing is too low for it to have any impact whatsoever. Introverted sensing has to be in the top 4 functions in order for spanking to be useful. That's why you only spank SI users, you do not spank SE users. Instead, to basically punish a child with extroverted sensing, you take away their freedom of choice, essentially. And then you tell them how they can earn their freedom of choice back. You have to make it in terms of earning. You don't just give it to them. You don't just placate them, because if you placate them and feed their SE and their FE, you're effectively feeding their ego instead of like actually parenting them and impacting them in such a way where they can be, a better person and onto the path to enlightenment. So keep that in mind. So with that being said, always give them a choice. This is why I have that example. Do you want to go to bed now, or do you want to go to bed in 5 minutes? Obviously, the child's going to pick 5 minutes and be like, okay, 5 minutes is up. It's time to go to bed. No, I don't want to. But like, hey, you made the choice. Okay, yeah, you're right. And then they go to bed, etc. It works like a charm. And the reason why is because they're NI focused. They're all about their freedom of choice. If you take away their freedom of choice, it's going to activate their NE demon, because it's like, hey, if I'm going to be shackled, you're shackled along with me. You make the rules, right? You make the rules, so you have to follow your rules, essentially. And that's the thing. ESTPs, especially ESTP children, understand when their parents are being inconsistent, and they have no respect for people who say, do as I say, not as I do. If you have that attitude with an ESTP child, they will never respect you. They will completely stop listening to you. They will realize that you're completely inconsistent in everything that you do, and it will be impossible to parent them, because they don't respect you as a parent, as a child. You cannot do that. You have to make sure that you yourself are consistent, because their SE is looking for consistency, and so is their TI. Their TI is filtering your behavior of what you're doing in terms of like right or wrong or true or false in their eyes. And if you are not consistent even one time, or if you end up being inconsistent over time, they lose all respect for you. They turn off what they're listening to, and they will not listen or have anything to do with you. And for them, they will have to learn life through school of hard knocks, and they will get zero benefit from parenting whatsoever, and it's your own damn fault. It's your fault that this way, because you weren't consistent, because you were putting on them responsibilities that didn't apply to you yourself. They hate that. Okay, this is why when you have battle commanders on in like a battle in a military engagement and whatnot, and you have commanders saying, "I would never ask any man in my ranks to do something that I would not be willing to do myself." That is integrity. That is what ESTPs, especially ESTP children, are looking for. And you as a parent, if you're going outside of that, if you're not showing integrity, well, then you're going to have a serious problem. Well, let me give you an example of that. An ENFP parent, because it's a superego relationship, an ENFP with an ESTP child, an ENFP is most likely to come off as inconsistent to the ESTP. Do you think the ESTP is ever going to listen to that ENFP parent? No, because the ESTP is perceiving lack of integrity. And it's like, well, if you're not going to have integrity, then I'm not going to have integrity. Why do I have to have integrity if you're not going to have integrity, etc.? Because ESTPs are all about their mirror. Their mirror is everything to them. So why are they doing that? So to properly raise an ESTP, you need to give them options. You need to give them choices. Hey, do you want to do martial arts? Or hey, and basically you want to say like, hey, I'm going to go do this. I'm going to go get a boat today. I'm going to go race this car. I'm going to go get this dog. I'm going to go swimming in this river. I'm going to go do this, this, this. I'm going to go have this experience. Do you want to come with me? And you give that ESTP the choice. Now, sometimes parents will start complaining to me and be like, okay, well, that doesn't always work because I need them to come with me right now and I can't just give them a choice. They need to understand they don't have a choice. Well, if that's the case, you need to use a Xanatos gambit. You need to use the Xanatos gambit. And remember, a Xanatos gambit, and this is something you have to understand for all NI inferiors. You present an NI inferior type, especially an ESTP, with choices. It doesn't matter which choice they pick. It always benefits you. That's it. That's all you do. You just present them choices that no matter what they pick, it benefits you, or it gets the outcome you as the parent desires. It's not that hard, folks. That's the Xanatos gambit. Oftentimes, everyone says, oh, ESTPs, they're very disobedient. Well, of course, because they have SI nemesis. But that's not bad for them to be disobedient. They are only as obedient as you are. If you follow your own rules, the ESTP will follow your rules. Because they know with their FE child that it's important to you because you yourself are doing it. Their SE sees you're doing it. Their FE realizes, oh, it must be important to my parent because he's doing it. And, okay, well, I'm going to do it too. They mirror you. But as soon as you stop following your own rules, oh, man, you've lost your ESTP child and you've basically lost them forever. And it's school of hard knocks for them for the rest of their life at that point. Or at least unless they come around people that they do respect, or until they come around people who do follow their own rules, and then they mirror those people, and then the ESTP can grow. But until then, it's your fault that they're stuck in the ditch. They're stuck in the gutter. And it's your own fault as a parent. You failed them because you weren't consistent. Congratulations. You hypocrite. You liar. Because that's literally what you're treating this ESTP. They realize you are fake. You are a fake parent. And they're going to go out there, and until they find someone who isn't fake, and you can imagine how rare that's going to be, you can imagine how hard that's going to be, they might be in their 30s before that happens. And how much of their life could they have ruined because you've already set up your ESTP child for failure. Congratulations. You played yourself. Guys, stop being bad parents and focus on the needs of what your children are, okay? And meet those needs. Seriously. They need freedom of choice. It is your job as a parent to cultivate the inferior function when you're raising them. It's so, so critical. make sure that they make choices on their own, so that by the time they hit adolescence, much less adulthood, that they're able to make choices without being afraid. Otherwise, you're going to have failure to launch syndrome on your hands. Otherwise, you're going to have them using, drugs and alcohol and nymphomania, especially for an ESTP, where they're having endless sexual relationships and gathering up STDs like crazy, all because you were inconsistent in your own parenting. Because you were not willing to follow your own rules that you would leverage towards your ESTP child. That's bullshit. How could you do this to your child? That's like literally child abuse. Make sure you have integrity, because that's all an ESTP wants. They want someone who has good enough character such that their integrity is everything. They are integral people, and that's what an ESTP is looking for. Such that an ESTP realizes in life it's their job to build up character in other people, because they realize no one has integrity. And that they have to be the one with integrity, with their INFJ subconscious. And for some reason, they got saddled with the responsibility to do so. How is it they are going to live their purpose in life, which is ultimately to build up character in others, their purpose in life, to build up character in others, to make other people integral, to have other people have integrity, if they don't have examples of integrity to mirror themselves, all because you couldn't follow your own rules as a parent? Wow. Wow. Come on. How can you do this? How can you do this? Okay? But then they reach adolescence. Oh, crap. Trust me, an ESTP adolescence is pretty hard. Well, you know what? It wouldn't be so hard, because if you did your job as a parent when you're parenting the ESTP and gave them a lot of choices and allowed your ESTP child to practice making choices and to practice going through all of the options, etc., and practice which one's going to give them the better outcome, etc., to practice using their introvert intuition so that they have better results for themselves that will have not bad consequences, because you were managing the consequences for them by giving them options that they could have, etc. For example, if I was to have an ESTP child, who became an adolescent, for example, I would have given them enough practice with decisions to make. I would tell them, hey, this is my ESTP son. You want to have sex with your girlfriend and you're 16 years old? Great. You can have as much sex with her as you want, provided you have made the following decisions. You want to make that decision? Well, here's what you have to pay up in order to have that decision. You have to have your own car. You have to have your own job. You have to have a plan of getting your own place so that you have your own place by the time you are 18, such that as soon as you're 18, you are immediately moved out of my home and have your own place where you can have sex with your girlfriend there as well. You know what I mean? So I have this huge ass checklist that they have to do to meet in order for me to be okay as a parent for them to have sex with anyone, for that matter, under my roof. You see what I'm saying, folks? Because that's the responsible thing to do. Now, of course, there's a lot of you out there who are like, well, premarital sex is a sin. And I'm like, okay, I have to challenge that, because in the book of Ruth, Boaz and Ruth definitely got it on before they got married. They lied together. Come on. What do you expect? Oh, that's not necessarily what it happens in the book of Ruth. It's not what it says. I'm like, have you guys read the symbolism behind the book of Solomon? I mean, the author was being informative there, not direct. Or do you expect all the biblical books to be direct instead of informative? Okay, and can you explain to me, okay, great. Have you psychoanalyzed all of the authors of the books of the Bible such that you know who's being informative and who's being direct? Have you figured that out? So by which authority do you have to make that judgment? You know what I'm saying? So at a minimum, the jury's still out. So if the jury's still out, maybe you shouldn't be so judgmental towards premarital sex. What did Jesus say about premarital sex? Nothing. Just like he said nothing about homosexuality. You might want to figure that out. And you know how it goes in terms of biblical lore. If it doesn't match to exactly what Jesus said, you throw it out. But since Jesus didn't say anything about it, well, what does that mean? Maybe you should consider how you're living your life. Maybe you should stop being ignorant, especially when it comes to spiritual matters. You know what I'm saying? I can say the same thing about the Quran as well. Think about it. Anyway, so you have to. So anyway, your ESTP grows into an adolescent at this point. You need to stop raising the ESTP because hopefully you did your job and they were able to make choices and get responsible choices and good results with making choices. Where you never limited your ESTP child. You never took away their choice. You always gave them options. You were playing the Xanatos gambit, so whatever options that you would give them would benefit you as well, if necessary, to get them what you wanted them to do, etc. But then it's just a shared experience with you. And hopefully you were consistent in following your own rules that you would levy on the ESTP. Hopefully you were. Because if you weren't, you'd have completely lost them. But let's assume you did. And now this child is an adolescent. Okay? Well, now you need to stop focusing on the NI inferior because that's their job now. The NI inferior, that gateway is closed, and that is now their responsibility. And their TI parent is starting to develop. But to get the TI parent, you need to get to TE critic. So at this point, you need to start impacting their critic function so that their parent function can actually develop directly. Now, luckily as a child, you can go right after the NI inferior, and as long as you're not taking the choice away, which will activate the demon, you can go direct. But it's really hard to go to direct for the TI parent to get them to think about things because they don't care what anyone else thinks per se. So you have to really get to the TI parent through the critic. This is a secret that most people don't realize through cognitive orbit. This is how you can actually help the TI parent develop the most by going for the TE, going for the rationale within their minds. So you ask them, hey, how do you know that? You have to provide enough challenge to the ESTP child or the ESTP teenager in this particular moment where it's like, okay, well, how do you know that? Prove it, okay? And if they're able to prove it, well, then you let them make that decision, etc. But you have to constantly challenge what they know at all times. You have to make them prove it with information, data, statistics, articles, research, those kinds of things. You have to provide that challenge. You also have to be willing to provide data, metrics, statistics, articles, information, sources as well. You kind of have to start behaving like an NFP and be like, ow, how do you know that? You know what I'm saying? How do you know that? You have to constantly challenge them on that because if they don't really actually know, they're like, okay, yeah, maybe I should check that out. Maybe that's not a really good decision for me to make. I'll do that. And what this does, it allows them to sharpen their TI parent so it's more accurate because you're essentially teaching your ESTP child to verify. Verification is everything. Otherwise, the ESTP is going to get taken advantage of by other people. That FE child will end up giving all their money, giving all their time, even giving their body over to other people, such that your ESTP teenager, especially if it's an ESTP female teenager, will literally be guilted into having sex with especially philosopher types, right? Literally guilted into having sex with other people. And it would be your fault because you didn't teach her how to verify because you were not impacting her critic function. And it'd be your own damn fault. And that you judge her for being so irresponsible. What about your responsibility as a parent? Because so far, you're not really a good parent in that particular moment because you weren't going out of your way to make sure that she's able to verify everything. Every single piece of input, TE, that comes into her TI, she has to verify it. And she verifies it with other TE. You see what I'm saying? Other rationale, other input, etc. Okay? That's where this goes. Other rules, other data, other metrics, other articles, other sources, right? And what other people are doing, getting to the reality of the situation. Otherwise, the FE child will be taken advantage of, and she will be guilted even to the point of giving up her virginity to a stranger if you are not careful. FE child can easily be taken advantage of. And they will carry that regret in their SI nemesis for the rest of their life. To the point where it will actually torment them because SI nemesis is all about nostalgia. And it will have a routine of tormenting them for the rest of their life. All because you did not teach them, you did not impact them in a way to give them what they needed to verify and to protect their child function from being taken advantage of, especially during adolescence. Do you not understand what I'm saying here, folks? Do you not understand how important this is? Come on. Furthermore, verification, here's an example as to why, another example why verification is so important Because without verification, they give in to their vice of nymphomania. That nymphomania oftentimes is because they're guilted into it, or oftentimes because they see other people doing it, because, monkey see, monkey do. Well, that applies to ESTPs. Hey, well, everyone else is doing it, so it's okay if I do it, right? Everyone else's parents allow their kids to do that, but you don't. I guess I must be wrong. It's all about verification. Verification is important, because if they verify, they find out that drugs is dumb. They verify, they find out that having sex is dumb. You see what I'm saying? Like, making these bad decisions are dumb because they're able to verify, because they're becoming responsible, right? Because a person's sense of responsibility comes from the parent function, and it helps give the SE function what it needs to do, the hero function what it needs to do to become from irresponsible to responsible, and it comes from the development of their parent function, where a person's skepticism is. Because if you can get your ESTP teenager to be skeptical of drugs and sex and alcohol and stupid people, especially when it comes to like other teenagers, etc., or people that would be predators towards teenagers, especially teenage women, for example. Oh wait, teenage boys is a problem as well. You guys do realize that over 70% of the children rescued from sex trafficking are in the United States foster care system. You might want to think about that for a second, okay? Parenting is important. Verification is important, because verification is the only thing that will protect an ESTP, when they can think on their own feet, when they can think, they have the nice head on their shoulders as their teenager, and they verify all the bullshit out there, then they will be making proper decisions. But that's only going to happen, as long as you are being consistent yourself, Otherwise, if you're not being consistent, if they see you drinking alcohol, if they see you having illicit relationships, if they see you doing drugs, that is completely thrown out of the window with an ESTP child. Congratulations, you played yourself. Bullying. Bullying is a serious problem for ESTPs, just like nymphomanias, and nymphomania comes through lack of verification, lack of development of the parent function. But bullying is another problem, and it's because oftentimes ESTPs do not verify the context in which the situation is, which would require them to, because usually an ESTP sees themselves as, oh, I don't bully people, but I stop people from bullying. Except, okay, you who have expert intuition demon, who are completely unaware of consequences, completely unaware of context, and then as a result of that, you assume that bullying is taking place when it is not actually taking place, and then you become the bully yourself, and you end up mirroring a situation. You end up causing the situation you are trying to avoid. Thank you, ESTPs. Thank you. I remember my friend, his name was Micah Palmer, growing up as a child. He was an ISTJ, and his older brother, Jonathan Palmer, who is an ESTP, would beat him because he's like, oh, my little brother's weak, and he's going to get beaten and made fun of at school. And guess what? That's right. He was beaten up and made fun of at school. And his brother thought he was going to toughen him up and whatnot. The thing is that his brother still was. And it made no difference. Wow, that was a complete waste of time, and it did no good. And I guess then his brother earned himself a reputation of being a bully, a reputation of being abusive, a reputation, and of being ultimately unwanted because he's trying to make his brother strong, trying to build some integrity in his brother or whatever. You know what I'm saying? That's bullshit. All because he was too stupid to figure out the consequences of his own actions, where his freedom of choice became unchecked such that it put his brother at risk, you see, and ended up actually creating a cycle of weakness in his brother that it took his brother 10 more years to overcome. And when he finally overcame it, his ISTJ brother ended up becoming stronger than him, which was excellent. But still, it was a serious problem. Kind of interesting, too, because their parents, he had an INTP father and an INFJ mother, and this ESTP raised by an INFJ mother. Do you really think that there are some integrity issues there? Do you really think that she was following it all the way with her son all the time? Probably not, okay? Bullying is a problem, okay? So that's really, the nature and the identity and how to parent an ESTP. But let's look at the consequences. Let's look at the results. positive or negative in terms of parenting your ESTP. You have nurture, which ultimately creates growth, which is where a person is like, okay, why am I? Who am I is my identity, but why am I is ultimately my purpose in life. And this is absolutely necessary. It doesn't matter, like, if you're so well parented and you understand your identity, that's great. But if you don't know your purpose either, that can also cause some problems. But knowing one's purpose only comes as a result of nurture received from other people, especially your parents. It's really important. If parents know their purpose, chances are their children will know their purpose. It's very simple. But don't forget, folks, the only proof of life out there is growth. And growth is painful. If you are going to spare the rod, you will spoil your child. That's biblical. If you shield your child from pain, then you will cause them to become entitled. And it's no different than an ESTP. And trust me, entitled ESTPs are very demonic because it's supporting their ENFP superego. They're very demonic people to the point where they're insanely hedonistic, all about debauchery. They have no problem using and abusing other women. My cousin Nick, that's what he did. Little Black Book screwed 600 women. His greatest claim to fame is 3 girls, 2 days, no shower. He literally screwed 3 girls in 48 hours time and didn't even take a shower. Wow, that is gross. That is disgusting. And if you want your ESTP to be gross and disgusting people, well, you shield them from pain. You don't help them verify, or you always take away their freedom of choice such that they will take their freedom of choice. Because here's what ESTPs do. If you tell them not to do something, even if it's for their own benefit, they will still do it. Just because they don't allow anyone to tell them what to do. You as a parent cannot tell an ESTP what to do. You just can't. So instead, you have to give them choices. And just make sure the choices you give them are all things that won't screw them over. But you can't shield them from pain. Because pain is necessary for developing wisdom. Pain is necessary for developing responsibility and humility. Pain is necessary for developing mastery. Pain is necessary for enlightenment. This is why I completely disagree with Buddhism. Buddhism is all about getting rid of attachment, because Buddhism is still aware that pain is necessary for reaching wisdom and enlightenment and nirvana. But the difference is they do it by letting go of attachment. Because if you have attachment, then there's pain and lacking attachments, etc. Or there's no pain and lacking attachments. And quite frankly, that's a demonic teaching. It comes from the cremation of care, which is this little dance that a bunch of rich white men dance around a little owl-based statue idol in the Bohemian Grove. And that's exactly where it comes from. Look it up, the cremation of care, and understand the entire lyrics of that little ritual that they perform in front of this owl idol. And it's literally about angels, after they've been kicked out of heaven, and they're basically the demons, and they're thrown into the prison known as hell, and they're all burning alive, etc., and they're so miserable over everything that they lost, that they just decide to destroy the concept of care altogether, because things don't hurt if you don't care about it. You see what I'm saying? Okay? Well, that's what can happen to your ESTP, and they become insanely hedonistic. And it's all about what they can get out of certain situations, which leads to the nymphomania, which leads to hedonism, which leads to debauchery. This is not appropriate behavior for an ESTP. And you don't want that. So stop shielding them from pain. You have to allow them to take risks and suffer the consequences of those risks. And if you want to reduce the risk or reduce the potential negative consequences to risks they take, give them choices that are risky, but you just understand the consequences you are willing to accept. Because they need to be around people who have the fortitude and the endurance, especially in their parents, to suffer consequences with them. Because that's what loyalty is all about to an ESTP. So remember, folks, personal responsibility, quarter-life crisis, humility, midlife crisis, wisdom, three-quarter life crisis, mastery, final life crisis. as long as you are parenting your children, as long as you are parenting your ESTP child in the proper way and giving them choices and focusing on developing their NI inferior while raising them, and then focus on developing their capability of verification and logic and filtering things properly. Filtering behaviors like drugs and sex and alcohol, for example, especially in their teenage years. Filtering that because their superego is starting to grow, and because of that, that parent function needs to get there to protect their child from being taken advantage by other people, right? Because, monkey see, monkey do. Everyone else is doing it, so it's okay if I do it, etc. Because if they're around bad kids, they're going to mirror the bad kids. But their TI will get in there and filter out those bad kids. You see what I'm saying? You need to help do that. You do that by appealing to their critic function. It's very simple. And as long as you're doing that, guess what? Well, with their parent function developed, they won't have quarter-life crisis. With their inferior function developed, they won't have midlife crisis. Wow. And you did your job as a parent. And then they will become parents. And then you become the grandparent at that point. And then it'll be their job to help you get through your three-quarter life crisis. Because the critic function is also known as the senile elder, also known as the senix, because it's senile. But when it has children, it takes on the responsibility of being a grandparent. It becomes wise. And you as a grandparent are wise. And let me tell you something, folks. You as a parent is absolutely necessary, because if you haven't estranged your children, if you haven't alienated your children, if you raise your children are still talking to you, your children will be there for you to help you get through three-quarter life crisis, which, even at that age, may claim your life. It's super important. And your children will also help you develop your mastery and get you through final life crisis, where they will be around you at your death. And you can ask yourself this question: was my life meaningful? Did I fulfill my purpose? Right? Well, the purpose and a meaningful life of the ESTP is, the purpose of an ESTP is to make other people, is to apprentice other people, to provide knowledge and wisdom to other people through their INFJ subconscious. That's what they do. They confer wisdom upon others. How the hell are they going to become wise if they're making stupid decisions, and if they're not filtering out bad people in their life, if they're allowing their effie child to be taken advantage by other people, and they just end up mirroring the wrong people? What are you doing at that point? You know what I'm saying? How exactly are you going for that? You know what I'm saying? So they will only reach their purpose of life. They will only have a meaningful life. They will only be able to fulfill their purpose as long as you, as the parent, are there. But if you fail as a parent, hopefully a mentor will come along. Because remember, the responsibility of Jungian parenting is you have to parent your children, you have to parent other people's children, and become a mentor to those children. You have to parent your own parents, which is what three-quarter life crisis is all about. It's what final life crisis may be about. And then also, you may have to parent your peers. That's what Jungian parenting is all about. We have to use our parent functions. We have to use all of our functions to parent and help our fellow man, because we must love our neighbor as ourselves. What business do we have loving anybody if we cannot love ourselves first? And then through loving ourselves first, then we can love and care for others. Treat others the way you want to be treated. It's the same concept, guys. That's why it's known as the golden rule, right? A rule that even TE critic would agree with, right? But if you do all these things for your ESTP, or if you see an ESTP who's been abandoned by their parents, who doesn't know their parents, you can come in there and be a good influence on the ESTP such that they start mirroring you. And because they have mirrored you, and they're mirroring you, and you are mentoring them, all those problems that they inherited from their parents go away. And you're righting the wrongs, and they're becoming an even better person. It's super necessary, and it is super important, folks. You have to do this. It is your responsibility. They may not even be your child. If it's your child, yes, it's your responsibility. If it's not your child, well, it's your secondary responsibility, because the actual parent is their primary responsibility, but they may not know their parents. And in this society of fatherlessness, we are setting up ESTPs for failure. That's why it's everyone's responsibility to take on that responsibility. I don't know how many times I get into arguments with ESTPs, including even my ESTP wife, where I say, Real men take responsibility for things that are not their fault. An example of this would be what true religion is, according to Jesus Christ. And he said true religion is taking care of widows and orphans, okay? A widow, obviously that child doesn't have a father. You come in there and you take care of that widow and her child, and you are being like that father to that child. And it solves the problem of fatherlessness. This is who you are supposed to be. This is who we all are supposed to be. It doesn't matter your type. It doesn't matter your age. It doesn't matter your gender. Everyone has to take on these roles, primary or secondary. It doesn't matter. And if ESTPs are not going to be set up for failure, you need to be right there, ready for them to mirror you and to be mentored by you. And you need to be willing to follow the exact same rules. You need to be willing to practice what you preach in order for them to respect you enough to take on your behaviors and your habits so that they could have good behaviors and good habits themselves, such that their freedom of choice is never taken away from them, and that they're able to filter out all the bullshit in their life so that they themselves can be successful. If you found this lecture useful, helpful, educational, enlightening, thank you all very much, and leave a comment below if you have any questions about ESTPs or parenting, and we're going to keep doing some amazing content. We still have How to Parent ENTJs coming out later this month, and I think we might even have a bonus episode for Season 14 as well. So check it out as it comes, and yeah, it'll be there. And more episodes for CSJ Responds as well. So with all that being said, folks, I'll see you guys tonight.